Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Well, happy 2014 and welcome to what most people believe will be the best year yet in this economic and commercial recovery. So on this special two-part Carolina Business Review, we will look more closely. We'll debate, we'll discuss the union between mother and child. And what does that have to do with the most critical issues in the Carolinas and the region? Ostensibly everything. Thank you again for joining us on the most widely watched program on Carolina business and public policy. I'm Chris William, and remember this quote, "The hand that rocks the cradle rules the world." That 19th century homily from poet William Ross Wallace identified motherhood as a leading power of change in the world. So if we get that right at the beginning, does it mean we're going to get it right later? How does it affect a child's ability to be ready to learn? Or what about the cycle of poverty? Or what about the family unit being on or off social programs? And if so, for how long? And what about intangibles like self-respect, discipline, self-reliance? I think you can get a sense of the mushrooming potential of where this might lead and how it permeates to the social bottom line. We will do our best, and we start with a panel of 5 experts from across the Carolinas in just a moment.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded January 10th, 2014. On this week's program, Robin Britt of Guilford Child Development, Ursula Douglas of Care Ring, Rhett Mabry from the Duke Endowment, Dr. Amy Picklesimer from the South Carolina Birth Outcomes Initiative, and Joe Waters of the Institute for Child Success.
Welcome to our program. Happy New Year. So glad that you're all here. Thanks for traveling, because I know on a gray day like it is, at least the taping day here, it's gray, and so welcome all. Rhett, for better or for worse, I'm going to start with you. You know, the question we asked at the top of the program was, if we get it right in relationships early with children, does that mean we're going to get it right later? And we're going to focus on to some degree about this program called Nurse Family Partnership, NFP, and we'll refer to that a lot. Give us just an elevator pitch on what NFP is and why there seems to be so much groundswell around this.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for having us on today. Nurse Family Partnership is a home visiting program for first-time low-income mothers, where essentially the nurse goes into the home while the mother's pregnant, essentially once a week, and then postpartum after delivery until the child's 2 years of age. And so over time, the nurse helps the mother to address the issues around child health, and also helps the mother to become more self-sufficient and deal with issues and then navigate the system that she may be facing and the challenges she may be facing.
So if you inject this program into that part of the relationship, and you get it right, then is it a guarantee that you're going to get it right farther down the line, or we're going to get it right as a society down the line?
It's not a guarantee, but there have been 3 randomized controlled trials testing this specific program, where you randomly assign people into the treatment group or into the control group. And from those trials, over 3 different decades dating back to the 1970s, we know that we're getting better spacing of pregnancy, so you don't have the second child as quickly and right on top of the first one. You have fewer childhood injuries, you have better school readiness, you have better prenatal outcomes and prenatal care. So there are a lot of positive things that we can document through research, through a comparative analysis, that we know if we do this right, we can get some differential effect for many of the clients.
Joe, 43 states have bought into NFP, Nurse Family Partnership, for better or for worse, and I think for better in the case that we're talking about. South Carolina is one of them. North Carolina is among the census of that as well. Statistically, the same question that Rhett had. If we get this right early, is there hard evidence? Has this been around long enough to say, yeah, this thing's working even better than we thought?
Yeah, thanks, Chris, again for having us. And Rhett's absolutely right. When you invest in the first 5 years of life, particularly a program like NFP that is rigorously evaluated, and it's focused on health outcomes primarily, but other outcomes as well, we see long-term effects that redound many years into the future, from reduced criminal justice incidents for the children in the program who participated in the program, better maternal life course, mom moves more quickly back into the workforce. So there are a lot of benefits down the road. Certainly these programs are very positive for society, and also too, net savings for government and better economic productivity and output.
Yeah, Ursula, you've been nodding your head in a couple of these things. Is that because you agree with it or you have a comment?
Definitely, I agree. We implemented back in 2008. We've served 300 plus families in our program, and I've definitely seen the great benefits of working with these moms from early in pregnancy and providing that support until the child reaches 2 years of age, and the great benefits that come from NFP participation.
So Ursula is an RN, Amy, and I haven't forgotten about you, Amy, back there. I know you're kind of buried behind everyone, but Ursula and Amy, you're foot soldiers in this battle to some degree. Amy, what's your take on some of the things that we've talked about so far?
You know, I think one of the best things about NFP is not just the research, but also the national support that the model has. So there's a national service office that oversees implementation of the sites on the ground and also replication. So when you're introducing a new NFP program into a new community, there's national support behind that and a well-worn path to follow, so that I can promise that the NFP program I'm delivering in Greenville is the same as the NFP program that they're getting here in Mecklenburg County. And that way we know that the benefits that have been shown in the research studies can be delivered consistently in all the different communities where the program's implemented, as long as we have fidelity to the model they've provided.
And there's some unique characteristics about the program. By focusing on the first-time mother, it's a very teachable moment. That mother has, as David Oles, the founder, calls it, this magic window, this first child, this huge desire that child will do better and get everything they need. So when this nurse, and that's important because this is a professional coming in who knows what she's talking about and works with that mom, she is absorbing that both in terms of having a healthy pregnancy, both in terms of what that child needs developmentally after it's born, and it's a very unique piece to have that nurse, which is a key ingredient, and then to have the first-time mother.
Go ahead, Rhett.
You know, one of the things that I think Robin was pointing out in my 20 years with the foundation is one of the things that we've learned is when you get success, or you're more likely to get success, is when you get the intersection of a motivated client or a person who wants change in their life and wants to do their best with an effective program. And by targeting first-time mothers, we think Nurse Family Partnership is hitting these mothers at a point where they have heightened motivation, where they're more open and susceptible and receptive to the information that the nurse is providing.
You know, you all make good arguments, and we're going to spend more time on the statistical nature of this, and this is an open question. How, okay, if everyone's nodding their head and everyone believes this, and I get the sense that even those that might be politically on the other side of whatever the policy is probably believe this, and I know they do, then why, if this is such not an easy fix, but a simple fix, why is it so hard to sell?
Because of deferred gratification.
And what does that mean?
You don't see, the policymaker doesn't see the results in 2 years. The results, you see some important results in those early years, but the results, for example, 80% of the children compared to the control group who are visited, 80% fewer arrests when they become teenagers. The moms, fewer arrests when they, during their lifetime. You see these things play out in the future. When they get to school, suddenly they're able to do what the other kids do in school and be successful and not drop out of school. So those are down the pike. So we're used in this society to, to the next profit statement, to the next year's balance sheet. This takes a while, but we've got to learn to make the investments that pay off down the road.
Chris,
A big percentage of a child's brain development occurs in those first 3 years, and you can't recapture that. If the child's not stimulated, if it doesn't have the interactions that nurse is teaching the mom to have with the child, the brain development is not going to occur.
Yeah, Amy, go ahead.
Yeah, I think another part of the challenge of the program is that the benefits are also scattered. So it's a health program where nurses are coming out to the home, but the savings don't just come back to the healthcare system. There are some savings from accidents and injuries and ER admissions for these children, but there's also savings to the school system, there's savings to the juvenile justice system, there's savings to the welfare system, there's savings in food stamps. So when you look at who's going to invest in this program, the benefits are scattered across multiple different domains.
So when you're arguing the point, Joe, in the State House, how do you articulate what Robin and Amy just said? That you're not going to see this show up in one particular metric, but you're going to see it show up pretty holistically.
Well, one thing we do is we talk not just about savings, but long-term value and economic impact long-term of these children and
For
moms
instance?
getting back into the workforce more quickly, being more productive, competitive employees, citizens, members of the community. They're long-term economic benefits that go beyond just government savings. Certainly, there are savings across government agencies and across governments, local, federal, and state. And we need to sell that, and that's effective. But if you're looking at a budget and you're feeling a lot of pressure as a legislator or as a policymaker to think about jobs and economic development, to combine those two things, savings or cost avoidance and long-term economic impact, is really a powerful argument for a program like NFP.
But there are, I don't want to leave the impression that all the outcomes are long-term. And I think Robin's right, it's a developmental program, so as children get off on the right track, they achieve better outcomes and reach their potential. But we've done a comparison study in South Carolina on the ground with the nurses that we've served. And on the short term, when you look at birth outcomes alone, our mothers, our NFP mothers, are half as likely to be low birth weight, half as likely to have a preterm delivery, and a third as likely, based on this comparison analysis, for the child to be admitted to an NICU, to a NICU, a neonatal intensive care unit. And you're talking about, I've heard it quoted, I don't know the exact number, but about $30,000 per Medicaid baby that goes into a NICU. So you're starting to save money short term, immediately as well, along with the long term.
Okay, and sorry to interrupt you, Rhett.
Yep.
Okay, so what's the cost on the front end? If there's at least we know of a $30,000 benefit, what's the cost?
So the cost, if the mother stays in the program until the child's 2 years of age, is somewhere north of $10,000 over 2.5 year period.
But the average is about $8,000.
This average is about 7.5 to 8,000, because not all mothers stay until the child's 2 years.
Who does it better, North or South Carolina right now?
North Carolina, no doubt.
South Carolina.
North Carolina.
Both
Duke or
equally.
Carolina, Clemson, USC, we got to get into that debate too.
Who does it better is a nurse. That's who does it better.
Well,
And just to add to
it's up to you, Ursula, right? Go
Right.
ahead.
Just to add to Rhett's point, looking at our data at our site over the course of the last year, we had 36 infants born to the Nurse Family Partnership Program at Caring. 92% of those babies were born after 37 weeks. And we know how important that is, how important birth outcomes are in long-term success of children. So those are the short-term, immediate impacts that we can see that NFP is benefiting, especially when we have moms who enter the program who haven't had prenatal care because they're waiting for their Medicaid to become approved, and they don't have prenatal care established. So we have nurses that are working with them in that period of time, helping them to make important changes to their diet and other lifestyle habits that could affect the pregnancy and the birth outcome.
You know, Amy, I look at you and I want to say this ought to be a no-brainer for OBs and pediatricians. And yet, we don't hear from that crowd a lot around this.
Yeah, the clients need to be enrolled in Nurse Family Partnership before 28 weeks pregnancy. So for sure, this is a domain of the obstetrician. And I think obstetricians in their training really have a focus on medical interventions during prenatal care and less of a focus on social determinants of maternal outcomes. So for me, one of the most compelling moments that the light bulb went off, it was serving those moms that I worry about the very most. You know, they come into my office and they're staying on someone's couch this week and someone else's couch next week, and I'm not sure they can even take care of themselves, let alone take care of a baby. And just checking their blood pressure or checking their belly, isn't what they need right now. What they need is someone to show them the way, to show them what they can do to pull their life together and really become ready to parent this child. And that's exactly the gap that NFP fills. So I spend a lot of my time talking with physicians about why referring patients to this program can help with the health and the outcomes for their patients in ways that they can't do just in a doctor's office.
You know, you bring up a good point. Both you and Ursula have argued, because you are the foot soldiers. You're on the front line of this and down where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. And I want to get into this. We're going to do that in the second part of this program, more about the social angle and aspect of this. Before we do that, I come back to you, Robin, come back to you, Joe. And Robin, let's start with you. North Carolina, it's a new day politically in North Carolina, at least it certainly has been the last 24 months or so. Has the reinforcement of the red state status of North Carolina made it harder or easier with a program like NFP?
It doesn't change the equation at all. NFP has always been and always will be bipartisan. We work in Washington. We work both sides of the aisle. Some of our strongest supporters are red, from the red states. So the good news about NFP is it is not political. Children should not be political, and the third goal, as Rhett alluded to in nurse-family partnership, is self-sufficiency. So when the nurse is making those visits during pregnancy, she's laying the seeds for what has to happen after that baby's born. If you want to go back to school or if you want to get a job, you don't want to have a second child, because if you're 19 years old and have 2 kids and you don't have a high school diploma, it's over. So the seeds are laid. You're going to need to worry about daycare. You're going to need to worry about transportation. You want to get that, and you want the best for that child. Well, you've got to be able to provide for that child with a job and those kind of things. You mentioned about the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. The hand that rocks the cradle rules the future of the child, and that's why it's so important for the world. And if that mom in a first-time pregnancy, in low poverty, without a support system, gets the support she needs to start that, first to have a healthy pregnancy with a not premature baby, then knows the developmental stages, the executive function, the kinds of things that need to be inculcated in that child to be successful in school and in life. She's ruling the future of that child.
Joe, how do you talk to policymakers in South Carolina? How do you, besides just the phrases to say, you know, they're going to be in the program for 2 years, the kid's going to be healthier, the mother's going to feel better about herself. I mean, how do you equate this? And I do not want to put words in your mouth, but how do you talk in terms of graduation rates, workforce development, economic development? I'm assuming there is not a dotted line, but a direct line that can be drawn from what NFP does and what goes on much later.
And if you're looking at South Carolina in particular, where I do most of our work, at the State House, there's a growing sense of the importance of investment in the first 5 years of life. It translates to the growing interest in South Carolina in education reform. So when you connect the dots for folks from their interest in high school graduation rate, their interest in middle grades transition, their interest in third grade reading scores, back to those first 5 years of life when brain development is so critical and is happening, it's very easy for politicians who are interested in some of those other things to understand the value of supporting a program like Nurse Family Partnership. That support is growing in South Carolina. And I would just point to one thing in particular, the expansion this past year in the budget of 4-year-old kindergarten in South Carolina, $26 million. That shows me that our governor and our legislators are increasingly understanding the value of investing in the first 5 years of life. We're going to continue to make the case that we need to be focused not just on 4K, but everything that happens 0 to 4, and NFP is a critical component of that.
And let's keep that going. Rhett, I want to take this, coming off, reflect on what Robin said and what you just heard Joe said, and I want to talk about from North Carolina. And I don't want to keep bringing this up, but North Carolina has a different makeup now than it has had since Reconstruction with Republicans in charge. South Carolina has a real initiative around education reform. North Carolina is struggling with cuts in their budgets and where they're headed and how they're all going to be there. So what's more important, NFP or broad education reform?
I don't think I think that's a false choice. I don't think I think we need both. I think we need NFP and I think we need broader education reform. I think they go hand in glove with each other. The opportunity I think we have with the Republican side of the aisle is that we're data driven. we're not about, some of the complaints you'll hear from the right-wing side of the discussion is that dollars are misused toward ineffective programs. What we're trying to push is we're trying to identify those programs that have strong research that can be effective, and we're trying to figure out how we can replicate those more broadly so they can serve more families. And so then ultimately you have individuals who are reaching their potential and are contributing to society as opposed to possibly being a drain on society in terms of governmental programs. So I think it is a message that resonates on both sides of the aisle. I truly do.
And here's the impact on education of this kind of intervention. If a kid arrives at kindergarten and can't do what the other kids do, that child becomes the anchor of the class, the discipline problems, and the whole class is slowed down because of behavioral issues that occur. You make that investment and a child arrives able to perform in school as a rising tide that lifts all ships, and everyone receives a better education.
Chris, there was a study done in the late 1990s, and they went into these homes of low-income families and high-income families, and they measured the number of words, the vocabulary to which the children were exposed. And at the end of that study, they basically concluded that children who grew up in more enriched, higher-income families were exposed to thousands more words before they entered school than children in lower income families. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to impress upon the mother that this child is an important human being that you have to develop, you have to nurture, and you have to help them reach their potential, and you have to expose them and enrich them. And we think Nurse-Family Partnership is one intervention. It's not a panacea, it's not the intervention, but it's one intervention that can move us in that direction.
And these are mothers that have a very strong desire to do what's best for their children. They just don't know. They haven't necessarily had the strongest relationships with their own parents. I mean, anyone who knows or loves a teenager understands that those relationships can fracture with their own parents. And so these women come to this really critical time in their life where they may have a baby that they weren't necessarily planning, that's coming before they finished school. They don't have a trusting relationship to fall back on with their mother, and they're floundering. And that's where the nurses come in, and they pick up that desire to do what's best and make a difference and raise a strong child, but to show them the way that they can do that. And I think one of the neatest parts about it that we've seen in Greenville is that so many of our clients decide they want to be nurses after meeting the nurses in the program. They have an inspiration and a goal.
Do you follow that thread down? Do they in fact go into that profession?
Absolutely. A lot of them start with an associate's degree or a medical assisting degree, and then go on to nursing school after that. It's really exciting to see, because nurses are so special. You know.
Ursula,
I like to add that, education doesn't begin when the children show up at kindergarten. In Nurse-Family Partnership, we're giving our parents the tools and the education that they need so that they're first teachers for their children. We help them to understand. We give them information about we give them anticipatory guidance so they know what to expect, what's typical development, how they can nurture their child's development, how they can advocate for their children when they enter the school system. So, we are partners, I think, with the schools, and people need to just recognize that we are really a preventive and early education program that has great value to help supporting the school system.
I'm sorry, excuse me, Ursula. We have about a minute left, Joe. Was there any surprising part of the statistical evidence to you since you've been in it now for so long? Is there something about it that unintended consequence or something where you said, wow, didn't even see that one coming?
Yeah, I would say no. When you think hard about the program and you go on a home visit and you see what the nurses are doing with the moms, when you look then at all the short and long-term outcomes, it makes sense. It fits for you. And when we've taken policymakers on home visits and allowed them to see firsthand and to be in the home with the mom, they get it too. They understand where both the short and long-term benefits are coming from, because they see that the work that the nurse is doing with mom and her child.
That's the last word for at least part one. Ladies, gentlemen, thank you. Stay with us for part two of this program. Thank you for watching our program. If you have any comments, not necessarily about Nurse-Family Partnership or anything around this very early intervention in the children, in the mother's relationship, go to our website, carolinabusinessreview.org. Make a comment. We will connect you with those folks, with these folks, if you'd like. And also you can watch the same program on that website. Again, thank you for watching. Next week, part two of this same dialogue. We hope you will join us then. Until then, I'm Chris William. Hope your weekend is good. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care, when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.